Hi and welcome to Koko Sleep, a brand new podcast of original children's bedtime stories designed to make bedtime a dream. If you like this podcast and enjoy falling asleep to our stories, please feel free to tell your friends, because they might enjoy falling asleep to them too. Before we get started, take a little time to snuggle down into your bed and make yourself as comfortable as you can. Wriggle your fingers and toes, and then snuggle down a little bit more. Close your eyes and take some deep, relaxing breaths. And now, let's settle into tonight's story, Koko's Bedtime, by Gillian Rogerson. Deep in the heart of a faraway forest stood a cosy wooden cabin. Inside the cabin lived a family of koalas. The youngest member of the family was called Koko. Koko's favourite time of the day was bedtime. He loved having a warm bath and then sitting in front of the fire as he sipped hot chocolate. And he loved his soft, fleecy pajamas because they made him feel all warm and cosy. But most of all, he loved snuggling down in his comfy bed and listening to a bedtime story. The stories always made him fall asleep quickly, and, like all koalas, Koko loved sleeping very much. It was early evening in Sleepy Forest, and the koala family had just finished their supper. They settled back in their chairs and talked about their day. Koko told everyone about the adventures he'd shared with his friends and the fun they'd had. He covered his mouth with his paw to cover up a yawn. Just talking about his day was making him feel tired. Koko listened to what everyone else had done. It sounded like they'd all had a wonderful day. Grandma looked towards the window and said, "The day's not quite over yet. It's a beautiful evening, and the sun will set soon. Why don't we go for a stroll and take in the evening air?" Grandpa declared that to be an excellent idea. He stood up and began to clear the plates away. Koko helped him, and between the two of them, the table was soon cleared. Grandma took her purple shawl from the coat rack and wrapped it around her shoulders. She took Koko's little coat from a hook and helped him into it. Koko fastened the buttons and pushed his paws into the deep pockets. The rest of the family gathered their outdoor clothes and put them on. The koalas left the cosy cabin, walked down the veranda steps and towards the forest path. Koko took one paw out of his pocket and held it out to Grandma. She took it in hers and smiled down at him. Koko smiled back. Grandma's paws were always warm, just like her hugs. The koala family entered the forest and walked along the path as it meandered through the leafy trees. Calming scents of lavender and rose drifted on an evening breeze towards them. Koko gazed at the sky. It had turned a darker blue, and there were delicate layers of pink and orange on the horizon. Koko noticed the first star had appeared in the sky and pointed it out to Grandma. The star twinkled brightly, shining like a diamond on a bed of navy velvet. Mother Koala looked up at the sky too and said, "That star looks brighter tonight. And can you see the moon over there, Koko? Behind the oak tree? It seems fuller this evening. It feels like there's magic in the air tonight." Grandma laughed lightly and said to Koko's mum, "You always say that. Every night feels magical to you. You felt that way since you were Koko's age. What is it about this time of day that feels so special?" Mother Koala thought for a moment. A smile slowly spread across her face. She said, "It's the special time when everything has been done for the day, but it's not quite time for bed yet. It gives me the chance to unwind and clear my mind of all thoughts of the day. And I look forward to that time when I can snuggle down in my bed, drift off to sleep, and get lost in wonderful dreams that await me. It feels magical." Grandma nodded in understanding. She looked at the bright star and said, "The evening does seem extra enchanting tonight. Koko, what do you like about bedtime?" Koko said, "Everything. I love my soft bed and cuddling my teddy bear. I love wearing my pajamas, especially the ones with ducks on them. I love having a warm bath and putting the bubbles on my nose, and then sitting in front of the fire and watching the flames." He grinned. "Not with the bubbles still on my nose. I wipe them off before I get out of the bath." Grandma and Mother Koala smiled at Koko. Koko said, "Do you know what I love most of all about bedtime?" "Is it listening to bedtime stories?" Grandma asked. "It is," Koko said. "How did you know?" "Because that's the first thing you ask for as soon as you get into bed." Koko chuckled. Grandma was right about that. The koalas continued walking along the forest path. The sky darkened and more stars appeared. Grandpa and Father Koala were a little ahead on the path and kept looking back over their shoulders and smiling at the others. In the distance, an owl hooted gently. A mother rabbit stood at the entrance to her burrow, looking at the night sky. She saw the koalas and said, "Isn't it a lovely night? It seems to me that the stars are shining more brightly this evening." The koalas smiled in agreement. 3 little bunnies popped their heads out of the burrow and called out, "Good night," before disappearing back into the family home. Mother Rabbit said good night too and went to join her family. The sky turned a darker shade of blue. Many more stars twinkled into view, and the full moon took centre stage amongst them. The family came to a sleepy sloth lying on the bough of a tree. Her arms were wrapped around it in a hug, and her head rested softly on the branch. Koko smiled. The sloth was his good friend Fudge. She loved sleeping even more than he did. Fudge blinked sleepily when she saw the family. She opened her mouth and looked as if she were going to say something. The koalas stopped walking and waited for Fudge to speak. But the little sloth closed her eyes and fell asleep instead. She began to snore gently. Grandpa whispered, "Good night, Fudge. Sweet dreams." The family continued walking through the forest. Baby otters were wallowing in the warm waters of a nearby river with their families. Some were floating on their backs and gazing at the stars. A family of frogs were standing at the side of the river and practicing their evening yoga moves. Their green arms stretched towards the sky as though reaching for the stars. A mole was sitting on a rock with his eyes closed. When Koko asked Grandma what the mole was doing, Grandma said he was meditating. Seeing the bewildered look on Koko's face, she explained, "It's a way of quieting your mind. Look at the mole See how he's taking slow, deep breaths? It helps him to relax. I do that sometimes too. Koko nodded and said he might try some meditating later on. The family continued along the forest path. They saw more animals getting ready for bedtime. A hedgehog was collecting fallen leaves and taking them into a hollowed-out log to make himself a comfy bed for the night. Squirrels finished their evening feast of crunchy chestnuts and scrumptious sunflower seeds before heading into the comfy boughs of trees. Groups of field mice were brushing their teeth, washing their little faces and combing their fur. Some were already dressed in their comfy night clothes. The koala family strolled onwards under the darkening sky. Cicadas chirped from night-fragranced grass at the side of the path. Fireflies flittered and fluttered through the trees. The calming scent of chamomile flowers drifted towards the koalas on a soft evening breeze. Twilight tunes came from the birds as they settled down snugly in their nests for the night. Moonbeams cascaded through gaps in the trees and lit the way ahead for the koalas. The koala family soon met another of Koko's friends, a little bear called Napoleon. He was sitting outside his cave with his family and looking at the night sky. He gave Koko a sleepy wave. Napoleon's mother smiled at the koalas and said, "Isn't it a beautiful evening? I've never seen so many stars." Napoleon is trying to count them. She smiled at her son. The little bear was pointing to the sky and quietly counting. When he got to 8, he let out a long, long yawn, blinked his eyes, and started all over again. He rested his head against his dad, and before he could count to 4, the little bear was asleep. Koko yawned. He was feeling sleepy too. Grandpa noticed how tired Koko was becoming and said it was time they headed back home. They took a shortcut that led them away from the path and through the trees. They met another of Koko's friends along the way. This time, it was a beautiful fox with amber-coloured fur. She was called Autumn, and she loved wandering through the forest of an evening. Autumn said hello to the family and walked with them a little way. She loved telling stories, and at Koko's request, she told them one about an owl who talked to the moon every night, and sometimes the moon would ask her to polish the stars using her feathers. Koko smiled. He had heard that story before, and it was one of his favourites. The koalas and the fox carried on walking. Very soon the koala's cabin came into view. Autumn said goodnight and went on her way. Koko climbed the veranda steps, still holding paws with his grandma. Once inside the home, Father Koala said he would run a bubble bath for Koko. Koko took his coat off and hung it up. He took Grandma's purple shawl and put it next to his coat. He helped tidy up the living room. He made sure his toys and books were put away neatly. Koko heard his father calling out to say his bath was ready. When Koko went into the bathroom, he saw a mountain of bubbles bobbing on the surface of the water, just how he liked it. He took a deep breath. He could smell roses and lavender, and there was a hint of peonies too. He loved all of those smells and took another deep breath of the calming perfume. Koko climbed into the warm bath and lay back in it. Some of the bubbles began to gently pop. Father Koala sat in a chair at the side of the bath and chatted to Koko. Koko moved his arms through the warm water and gathered some of the bubbles together. He tried to make them into a castle, but the bubbles looked more like a cloud. Koko didn't mind. He loved clouds, and sometimes he dreamed about floating through the sky on a fluffy white cloud. He decided to make more clouds out of the bubbles. When he had enough clouds, he made himself a bubbly hat and gave himself a bubbly beard too. His father laughed. Koko asked him to lean closer, and when his father did, Koko gave him a bubbly hat and beard also. His father looked at himself in the mirror and said he looked very handsome indeed in his new hat and beard. The two koalas took the bubbles from their heads and gently blew on them. The bubbles floated through the air and landed softly in the bath. Koko lowered himself further into the scented water. It felt so warm and relaxing. He yawned. His father said it was time for Koko to get out. Father Koala took a fluffy towel from the warm radiator, and as soon as Koko got out of the bath, he wrapped it snugly around his son. Koko's favourite pajamas were on the radiator too, the ones with the yellow ducks on them. Koko dried himself and then put on his pajamas. They had been out on the washing line that morning and smelled of sunshine and warm breezes. Father Koala and Koko went into the living room. Grandma was about to close the curtains. Koko walked over to her and helped. Before closing the curtains, they looked at the bright full moon and the twinkling stars. They heard an owl hooting in the distance. Koko wondered if it was the owl who sometimes polished the stars, and if she was going to clean them again tonight. The curtains were closed, making the cabin feel even cozier. Grandma smiled at Koko and said he smelled of lavender and roses, and peonies too, Koko said with a smile. She took his paw and they walked over to the sofa. The fire had been lit and it crackled gently in the hearth. Koko sat on the sofa between his grandma and mother. He gazed at the fire and watched the flickering red and yellow flames dancing over the logs. He blinked tiredly. Grandpa settled down in the rocking chair next to the fire and pulled a blanket over his knees. He began to rock back and forth in a soothing motion. Koko's father brought in a tray of drinks and put it down on a table at the side of the sofa. He handed the drinks to the family and gave the smallest cup to Koko. Koko wrapped his paws around the cup and smiled happily. The cup was full of hot chocolate and was topped with a swirl of cream. The drink was just the right temperature for the little koala. Koko took a sip and felt the chocolatey drink flowing into his tummy. His grandma and mother cradled their cups and began to drink their hot chocolate too. Father turned on a couple of lamps in the corners of the room and asked if everyone's drinks were okay, and did anyone want any more? Grandma said it was the best hot chocolate she'd ever had, and 1 cup was more than enough for her, thank you. Mother Koala said she'd already drunk hers because it was so delicious, but she wouldn't have any more because she was already feeling sleepy and would be heading to bed soon. Grandpa said he'd finished his drink too, and like Grandma, 1 cup was plenty for him. He asked if anyone would like to listen to him playing the ukulele. The koala family never said no to Grandpa and his ukulele. They loved listening to him. Grandpa picked up the pink ukulele that was resting next to his chair and cradled it in his arms. He began to gently pluck the strings. A beautiful harmony arose from the instrument. In a deep, soothing voice, Grandpa started to sing about a fairy called Midnight and how she danced with the stars one magical evening. Koko loved that song. He finished the rest of the hot chocolate, put his cup down and closed his eyes. The mesmerizing melody coming from the ukulele wrapped around the koala like a warm blanket and made him feel cozy and warm. Koko yawned sleepily. Grandpa sang another song, his voice warm and soothing. The fire crackled quietly. Koko yawned again and leaned against his grandma. Grandma kissed the top of his head and said it was bedtime for Koko. Koko opened his eyes and asked if he could still have a bedtime story. Of course, Grandma said. Come on, little one. Say goodnight to everyone. Koko pushed himself off the sofa and gave Grandpa and his parents a hug. He tried not to yawn too much, but he couldn't help himself from letting out a couple of yawns. He was so very tired. Grandma noticed how tired he was and scooped the little koala into her arms. She took him into his bedroom and put him into bed. She tucked a soft bed cover around him. Koko smiled and snuggled down into his bed. He reached for his teddy bear and cuddled him against his chest. He smiled happily. He loved his bed. Grandma turned on the lamp at Koko's side. It was in the shape of the moon and had a halo of twinkling stars floating around it. Grandma sat in the chair next to the bed and rested her hands on her lap. She asked Koko which story he would like to hear. Koko thought about all the bedtime stories he knew. He loved them all. He knew stories about a magical school where a brother and sister went on enchanting adventures together, and tales about a kind monkey who travelled the seas and made lots of new friends wherever he went. There was a story about a wise elephant who loved helping others, and another story about a magical carpet that could fly through the sky. Koko would love to have a carpet like that. Koko asked Grandma if they could have the story about the magic school, please. The one where the children first arrive at the school and the magic begins. Grandma said she liked that one. She asked if Koko was warm enough. He nodded and snuggled even further under the warm blanket. He closed his eyes and waited for Grandma to begin. Grandma started to tell him the tale of the magic school and the wonderful things that happened there. The words of the story drifted into Koko's mind, and he found himself happily transported into another world. He remembered what Grandma had told him earlier about taking slow, deep breaths to help him relax more. The little koala began to take some deep, relaxing breaths in and out, in and out. The bedtime story continued. Grandma's voice was low and soothing. Koko took some more relaxing breaths in and out, in and out. A delightful drowsiness flowed through his body from the top of his head down to the tips of his toes. His blanket was warm and snuggly. His bed was soft and cosy. The story continued. Grandma's voice was low and soothing. Koko smiled softly. The little koala fell into a deep, relaxing sleep and was soon lost in restful dreams.